The poor sister cannot even buy a house in the suburbs. My sister mocked at my parents' anniversary dinner, tossing her linen napkin onto the table. My dad opened the evening edition of the Wall Street Journal and froze. New billionaire reveals Walker Tower, changing the city skyline. He read aloud, his voice shaking as he stared at the photograph. He slowly looked across the table at me. I lifted my wine glass and grinned. Surprise! Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever proven your toxic family wrong. Growing up in the wealthy Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta meant the Walker family name was a brand we were all expected to protect and worship. My father, Marcus Sr., built a highly successful logistics empire from the ground up, while my mother, Vivian, spent her days meticulously curating our status among the Black elite. She practically lived for her charity galas and exclusive society luncheons. But their true pride and absolute joy was my older sister, Chloe. Chloe did everything right according to their strict playbook. She was groomed for high society, and her crowning achievement was marrying Preston Sterling. Preston was white, came from old Boston money, and ran a venture capital firm. To my status-obsessed parents, having a Sterling in the family was the ultimate prize, validating their arrival into the highest echelons of wealth. I, on the other hand, was considered the family stain. At 32 years old, I was the defiant daughter who refused to work for the family logistics company. My parents thought I was scraping by, flipping rundown properties in dangerous neighborhoods. They had absolutely no idea I was quietly building an empire of my own. We were gathered around the massive mahogany dining table for my parents' anniversary dinner. The crystal glasses sparkled under the warm chandelier light, and the air was heavy with roasted lamb and unspoken tension. Chloe extended her left hand over her plate, making sure the light caught a massive new diamond ring. "Look what Preston got me for our anniversary," she beamed deliberately, holding it in my line of sight. "He says a sterling wife deserves only the best." She then glanced down under the table at my sensible leather loafers. "You know, Simone, if you actually applied yourself, you could maybe afford a decent pair of shoes. It is really embarrassing seeing you walk around looking like you just left a construction site." I took a slow, calm sip of my wine, tasting the rich notes of the vintage, before responding. "It is a beautiful ring, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and pleasant. "I am just surprised Preston managed to buy it, since the charge went through your personal American Express card last Tuesday." The entire room went completely still. Chloe dropped her hand to her lap, her face flushing a deep, angry shade of crimson. Preston shifted uncomfortably in his custom-tailored suit, his jaw tightening as he glared at me. "How would you possibly know that?" Chloe stammered, her voice losing its previous arrogance. I smiled, setting my glass down on the table. "I have friends in banking," I replied simply. "When you live in a city like Atlanta, word travels fast about who is actually spending the money." Preston quickly jumped in, desperate to regain control of the narrative and protect his fragile ego. "Listen, Simone," he said, adopting a tone of patronizing concern. "We know you are struggling. Flipping those cheap properties on the south side cannot be paying the bills. I was actually talking to my partners at the firm today. We need a new receptionist at the front desk. The pay is hourly, but it is steady. It might help you cover rent for that tiny apartment of yours, so you do not have to keep wearing those tragic shoes." My mother. Vivian nodded vigorously from the other end of the table, entirely missing the condescension in his voice. "You really should take him up on that generous offer, Simone. It is humiliating when my friends at the club ask what my youngest daughter is doing, and I have to change the subject. You are 32 years old. It is time to stop playing in the dirt and get a real job. You are dragging the Walker name down with your lifestyle." I looked at the three of them. My sister clinging to a facade of wealth, my mother desperate for high society approval, and my brother-in-law hiding behind a trust fund that I knew for a fact was drying up. I did not raise my voice. I did not show anger. When you hold all the winning cards in your hand, you do not need to flip the table. "I am quite satisfied with my real estate projects, Mother," I said calmly, cutting a piece of meat. "I think you will find my current employment is more than sufficient." Right at that moment, my father, Marcus Sr., walked into the dining room. He had stepped into his study earlier to retrieve the evening mail. He held the Wall Street Journal in his hands, but his face was drained of all color. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "Marcus, what is wrong?" my mother asked, her tone shifting from condescending to deeply concerned. My father did not answer her. He walked slowly to the head of the table, staring blankly at the front page of the newspaper. His hands were trembling so badly the paper rustled loudly in the quiet room. "Simone," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What is this?" He dropped the newspaper onto the center of the table, right next to the floral centerpiece. The headline took up the top half of the page in bold black ink. Onyx Holdings announces female CEO behind the $400 million Walker Tower. Below the text was a high-resolution photograph of a sleek black glass skyscraper set to dominate the Midtown Atlanta skyline. And right beside the architectural rendering was a full-page profile picture of me looking confident in a tailored suit. Chloe leaned forward, reading the headline out loud. Her eyes widened until they looked like they might pop out of her head. $400 million, she gasped, her voice cracking with shock. This has to be a joke or a printing mistake. Simone cannot even afford a house in the suburbs. There is no way she is a CEO of anything. Preston grabbed the newspaper, his blue eyes scanning the article frantically. "This says Onyx Holdings acquired the entire downtown block," he muttered, sounding completely breathless. "It says the founder and sole owner is Simone Walker." He looked up at me, his face pale and stricken. "You are Onyx Holdings." I picked up my napkin and gently dabbed the corners of my mouth, enjoying the sweet taste of victory. "Those rundown properties I was buying, Mother, were located directly in the path of the city expansion project," I explained, my voice steady and completely professional. "I spent the last 8 years quietly acquiring adjacent lots under my holding company. I leveraged those assets, secured private equity funding, and designed a skyscraper. So yes, Preston, I am Onyx Holdings. And no, I will not be needing that receptionist job at your firm." The silence in the dining room was absolute and deafening. I watched the realization wash over my family like a tidal wave. I was not the poor, struggling sister they had pitied and mocked for a decade. I was a billionaire hiding in plain sight. I expected shock. I perhaps even expected a belated apology for the years of ridicule. But what happened next reminded me exactly why I had kept my success a secret from them for so long. My father did not smile. He did not congratulate me on pulling off one of the biggest real estate deals in Atlanta history. Instead, his expression hardened into a mask of cold calculation. He slammed his hand against the mahogany table, making the crystal glasses rattle and the silverware clink. "You kept this from your own family," he demanded, his voice booming with the authority he used to run his business. "You let us worry about your future while you sat on an empire bearing our last name." I sat up straighter, refusing to be intimidated by his anger. "I built this entirely on my own, Dad. I did not ask for a single dime of Walker money." "That does not matter," he snapped aggressively. "You are a Walker and this family operates as a single unit. We have a reputation to protect, and you are a young, unmarried woman dealing with ruthless corporate sharks in the real estate world." He pointed a firm, demanding finger directly at Preston. "Tomorrow morning you will have your lawyers draft a transfer agreement. You are going to sign over 50% of your voting shares to Preston. He has the background in venture capital and the pedigree to handle a project of this massive magnitude. We are keeping the wealth under proper family control, and Preston will manage the finances from here on out." I stared at my father, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The sheer audacity of his demand took my breath away. He was perfectly willing to strip me of my life work and hand it over to a white man who was currently drowning in secret debt just because it fit his outdated narrative of how success should look. Vivian chimed in, her eyes gleaming with sudden greed. "Your father is right, Simone. You have done a nice job acquiring the land, but building a skyscraper is a job for a man. Preston has the connections in Boston and Wall Street to make sure this project does not collapse. You should be grateful your father is stepping in to protect you from yourself. Just sign the papers tomorrow, and we can finally be proud to talk about you at the country club." Preston quickly recovered his composure, adjusting his tie as a smug, arrogant smile crept back onto his face. He actually looked relieved, thinking he had just been handed the ultimate lifeline to save his failing fund. "Do not worry, Simone," he said, dripping with fake reassurance. I will make sure you still get a generous monthly allowance. You will never have to worry about buying cheap shoes ever again. I looked around the table at my own flesh and blood teaming up with a fraud to steal my legacy. The betrayal stung deeply, but it also ignited a fire inside me that they could not possibly extinguish. They thought I was going to cry or submit out of familial obligation. They thought the poor sister was just going to hand over the keys to the kingdom. They were dead wrong. I looked at the piece of paper my father pushed across the mahogany dining table. 50%, half of my blood, sweat, and tears. I picked up my crystal wine glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. The vintage Bordeaux tasted like absolute victory. I set the glass down with a sharp thud that made my mother flinch. You want me to hand over half of a $400 million real estate development to a man who currently cannot even afford to pay the valet parking at his own country club? I asked, my voice echoing in the dead silence of the dining room. Preston laughed, but the sound was thin and reedy. It completely lacked his usual booming Boston bravado. He adjusted his silk tie, his pale skin suddenly looking a little flushed under the warm light of the chandelier. Simone, please do not be dramatic. My firm manages billions in assets. We are simply offering to bring your little project under a secure corporate umbrella. It is the smartest move for the family legacy. I stood up from my chair, slowly pushing it back so the wooden legs scraped loudly against the imported Persian rug. A little project, Preston. Is that what you call a 50-story skyscraper in the absolute heart of Midtown Atlanta? Because last time I checked, your so-called billion-dollar fund was currently facing a margin call that you have been desperately hiding from your father-in-law for 3 months. My father Marcus turned his head so fast his neck popped. What margin call? Preston, what is she talking about? Preston waved a dismissive hand, flashing his perfectly veneered teeth. Marcus, she is just throwing a tantrum because she feels threatened by real corporate structure. You know how she gets. She has always been overly emotional when things do not go her way. We should just call the lawyers in the morning and have them finalize the transfer. Chloe chimed in immediately, her diamond ring flashing as she pointed an accusing finger at me. Stop ruining Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner, Simone. You are always doing this. Preston is a financial genius. He was featured in Forbes last year. He knows exactly what he is doing. He paid for that feature, Chloe. I shot back, refusing to take my eyes off my brother-in-law. A public relations firm charged him $40,000 to place that article right around the time he took $50 million of his investors' money and dumped it into a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange that went completely bankrupt last week. The color instantly drained from Preston's face. He looked like a ghost standing in a custom-tailored suit. My mother Vivian let out a loud gasp, clutching her pearl necklace as if she were protecting it from thieves. $50 million, she choked out, her eyes darting frantically between me and Preston. Preston, tell me she is lying. Tell me this is just another one of Simone's jealous fantasies. She is just trying to tear down your marriage because she is single and bitter. I did not give him a chance to formulate a lie. I pulled a sleek silver flash drive from my blazer pocket and tossed it onto the center of the table beside the remains of the anniversary dinner. All the offshore transaction records are right there on that drive, I said, my voice dropping to a razor-sharp whisper. He bypassed the risk management protocols of his own firm. When the crypto market crashed, he doubled down using the Sterling Family Trust as collateral. The trust is gone, Chloe. The legendary venture capital fund is functionally insolvent. He is completely broke. The only reason he came to Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner was to convince Dad to let him dip into Walker Logistics accounts before federal investigators started asking questions. My father grabbed the edge of the heavy wooden table, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. He looked at Preston, his chest heaving with a mixture of terror and betrayal. Is this true, Preston? Did you lose $50 million of your investors' money? Tell me right now before I call my own accountants. Preston sprang up from his chair, knocking it violently backward onto the hardwood floor. His carefully constructed image of the refined, wealthy white savior completely evaporated in a single second. The veins in his neck were bulging, and his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were stark white. You hacked my private servers, he bellowed, his voice cracking with uncontrollable rage. You are committing corporate espionage, you miserable little thief. Preston slammed both of his hands down on the dining table, leaning toward me with a menacing glare. "You think you have won." He spat, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You think because you bought some cheap dirt and poured some concrete that you are somehow in my league. I am a Sterling. I play golf with the mayor. I personally fund the political campaigns of the entire city council. Do you really think they are going to let you finish that building once I make a few phone calls to my friends?" He walked around the table, closing the distance between us, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "By 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will have the zoning board revoke every single permit you hold. I will have environmental inspectors crawling all over your site, finding violations that do not even exist. I will bury your company in so much red tape and litigation that you will be begging me to take it off your hands for pennies on the dollar. You are completely out of your depth, you delusional black woman. You do not belong in this world, and I am going to make sure you lose every single thing you have ever built." The racial slur hung in the air, heavy and incredibly toxic. My father gasped loudly, but he did not step forward to defend me. My mother looked away at the wall, pretending she had not heard the disrespect. Chloe just stared at her husband, shocked by his violent outburst, but still far too afraid to challenge his authority. They were all paralyzed by their deep-seated fear of losing their prized connection to his elite world. But I was not paralyzed. I was energized. "You are going to bury me." "Preston," I asked, reaching slowly into my blazer pocket and pulling out my smartphone. "With exactly what money?" "The high-powered lawyers you plan to call require massive retainers. The corrupt politicians you plan to bribe require heavy campaign contributions. You cannot even afford to buy your wife a morning coffee right now without bouncing a check." I pressed a number, hit the speaker button, and placed the phone face up on the pristine white tablecloth. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered, filling the silent dining room. "Good evening, Miss Walker. This is Richard Hayes from the Corporate Restructuring Department at First National Bank. I assume you are calling to confirm the transfer details." "Yes, Richard," I said, my eyes locked on Preston's terrified face. "I have my brother-in-law, Preston Sterling, here at my parents' anniversary dinner. I thought it would be a wonderful surprise to let him know the current status of his debt portfolio. Could you please confirm the transaction we finalized at 4 o'clock this afternoon for everyone at the table?" "Certainly, Ms. Walker," the banker's voice echoed, crisp and undeniably real. "I can officially confirm that Onyx Holdings has successfully purchased the entirety of Preston Sterling's defaulted margin debt from First National. The total portfolio amount is $52,400,000. The transfer of ownership is legally complete. Ms. Walker, your firm is now the sole creditor holding Mr. Sterling's debt." I reached down and ended the call. The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock out in the hallway. Preston looked like the floor had just opened up and swallowed him whole. He stumbled backward, gripping the back of a heavy wooden dining chair, just to keep from collapsing. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The arrogant, powerful aristocrat was entirely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified fraud, facing his own ruin. Chloe let out a whimpering sob, pressing both hands to her face as the reality of her husband's absolute bankruptcy finally sank in. My father sank heavily into his chair, looking at me with a mixture of absolute horror and a very new, terrifying awe. My mother stood completely paralyzed, her dreams of high society dominance shattering into a million irreparable pieces right before her eyes. "You see, Preston," I said, my voice soft, but echoing with absolute unbreakable authority. "You cannot call the mayor tomorrow morning. You cannot call the zoning board, because if you make one single move against my tower, I will call in that $52 million debt immediately. And when you inevitably fail to pay, I will seize everything. I will seize the Sterling family trust. I will seize Chloe's new Porsche. I will seize your country club memberships, your tailored suits, and the very shoes on your feet." I leaned across the table, closing the distance between us, until he was forced to look me directly in the eyes. "I do not just own the Skyline, Preston. I own you." The sharp crack of flesh, hitting flesh, echoed louder than any words could. My head snapped violently to the side. A stinging heat spread across my left cheek, followed instantly by the sharp metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the heavy mahogany table just to steady myself. I slowly looked up, fully expecting to see Preston standing over me. But Preston was still frozen in his chair, his eyes wide with shock. It was my father. Marcus Sr., the proud and distinguished patriarch of the Walker family, stood over me with his hand still raised and his chest heaving. He had just struck his own daughter. He had used physical violence against his own flesh and blood to protect the fragile ego of the white man who had just hurled a racial slur at her. "Have you lost your damn mind?" My father roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandelier above us. "You do not speak to him like that. You do not threaten this family. He called me a slur, Dad." I said, my voice dangerously calm, as I wiped a drop of warm blood from my lower lip. "He threatened to destroy me and steal everything I have built. And your response is to hit me. Because you are destroying us," my father shouted, his composure entirely gone. The polished, sophisticated facade he wore for the Atlanta elite completely melted away, leaving behind a terrified old man. "You think this is just a game, Simone? You think you can just buy his debt and play the ruthless billionaire? You have absolutely no idea what you have done." He grabbed the lapels of his suit jacket, looking suddenly frail and desperate. "If Preston goes down, Walker Logistics goes down with him." I stared at him as the pieces of a sickening puzzle violently snapped into place. "What did you do?" "I guaranteed his bridge loan," my father confessed, his voice dropping to a hoarse whisper. "When the crypto market started tanking 3 months ago, Preston came to me. He needed immediate liquidity to satisfy his investors before the quarterly reports went public. The major banks would not touch him. So I used the logistics company as collateral to secure a massive line of credit for his fund." "You leveraged our grandfather company," I asked, the betrayal settling deep into my bones like lead. "The company our family built through the civil rights movement, through redlining, through decades of systemic oppression. You risked our entire legacy to bail out a white man who was gambling with venture capital." My mother stepped forward, her face streaked with tears that ruined her immaculate makeup. "We did it for Chloe," she shrieked, her voice pitching into hysteria. "We did it to protect her marriage and our standing in this city. If the Sterling Fund collapsed, our reputation would be dragged through the mud, right along with it. We are the Walkers. We do not fail. And now you hold the executioner axe over your own family." Chloe finally found her voice, stepping out from behind her husband. "You have to cancel it, Simone. You have to forgive the debt. You have enough money now. You just said you have a $400 million project. 50 million is nothing to you. Just tear up the contract and let us walk away. We can go back to normal." "You want me to tear up a legally binding corporate debt acquisition?" I asked, looking at the three of them with pure disbelief. "To save the man who just called me a delusional black woman. To save the parents who stood by, watched him say it, and then struck me for defending myself. You want me to absorb a $50 million loss to protect the golden child who spent the entire evening mocking my shoes." I picked up my phone from the table and slipped it back into my tailored blazer. "The debt remains," I said with absolute finality, "and the interest starts compounding at midnight." "Simone, please," my mother begged, lunging forward to grab my arm. "If you enforce that debt, the bank will seize Walker Logistics. We will lose the house in Buckhead. We will be out on the street. You cannot do this to your own mother and father. You cannot destroy your own blood." "You put yourselves on the street," I replied, pulling my arm violently out of her grasp. "You bet on the wrong horse because you were blinded by his pedigree and his skin color. You thought a Sterling was a safer investment than your own daughter. You handed him the keys to our family legacy on a silver platter because you wanted the prestige of his last name. Now you can pay the price of your own social climbing." I looked around the lavish dining room of the penthouse I had leased privately for 2 years through a corporate residential agreement. I had invited them here for my parents' anniversary dinner, hoping to share my success and mend our fractured relationship. Instead, they had spent the evening insulting the home, treating the lease as proof I was struggling, throwing my career in my face, and worshipping a fraud. "Get out," I commanded, pointing toward the custom oak double doors at the entrance of my penthouse. "All of you. Take your coats, take your pride, and get out of my house. Your house." Chloe scoffed, looking around wildly as if looking for a landlord to appear. You rent this place. This penthouse is leased in my name, Chloe, I said with cold authority. None of you owns a key, a share, or any right to decide who stays here. Now get out before I have private security escort you from the building. The reality of their situation finally crushed whatever resistance they had left. Preston did not say another word. The arrogant venture capitalist was completely broken, staring blankly at the floor as he shuffled toward the door. Chloe followed him, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning the loss of her superficial lifestyle. My father paused at the threshold, looking back at me with eyes full of resentment and fear. He had lost his company, his reputation, and his favorite daughter all in one night. My mother simply wept, leaning heavily against the doorframe before disappearing into the hallway. When the heavy doors finally clicked shut, the silence in the penthouse was absolute. I walked over to the dining table, poured myself another glass of wine, and drank it while looking out over the glittering skyline of Atlanta. I had won. But the taste of victory was mixed with the bitter ash of family betrayal. I knew this war was far from over. Preston was a wounded animal, and wounded animals were unpredictable. My driver pulled my black SUV up to the construction site just as the sun began to rise over the city. But as we turned the corner onto Peachtree Street, my heart dropped into my stomach. There was no roar of heavy machinery. There were no cranes moving across the morning sky. Instead, the entire perimeter of Walker Tower was surrounded by a sea of flashing red and blue lights. Dozens of police cruisers were parked haphazardly, blocking the main entrances. Uniformed officers were standing at the gates, turning away hundreds of my construction workers who were waiting in confusion on the sidewalks. "You cannot be here, ma'am," one of the officers said gruffly. "This site is closed, pending a federal investigation." "I am Simone Walker," I stated firmly, keeping my posture rigid and my voice commanding. "I am the CEO of Onyx Holdings and the owner of this property. I demand to know who authorized this shutdown and under what grounds." A man in a cheap beige suit stepped out from a black government sedan parked near the gates. He flashed a badge that identified him as a senior investigator for the city inspector office. "Ms. Walker," he said with a condescending smirk that looked entirely too familiar. "I am Inspector Davis. We received an anonymous tip late last night from a very highly placed source in the venture capital sector. We have a court order to suspend all construction operations at Walker Tower effective immediately." On what grounds, I demanded, feeling the cold realization creeping up my spine. Preston had actually done it. He had called in his political favors. He was trying to suffocate me before I could collect his debt. On the grounds of suspected financial fraud and international money laundering, he said, his smirk widening into a malicious grin. "We have reason to believe that Onyx Holdings is a shell company being used to wash illicit funds. This site will remain locked down until our investigation is complete. Have your lawyers call our office, Ms. Walker. It is going to be a very long year for you." I turned to my driver and pulled open the door of my SUV. "Take me to City Hall," I ordered, my voice devoid of any emotion, "right now." The ride to downtown Atlanta took exactly 14 minutes, but my mind was moving a million miles a minute. I bypassed the security desk on the 4th floor of the Department of City Planning. I knew exactly who was pulling the strings for Inspector Davis. Chief Inspector Gregory Thorne was the head of the department. He and Preston Sterling were fraternity brothers at Harvard. They shared the same arrogant pedigree, the same country club memberships, and the exact same illusion of untouchable power. They firmly believed that a black woman belonging to the right family was only useful if she remained quiet and compliant. I pushed open his solid oak double doors without bothering to knock. Thorne was sitting behind his massive custom desk, sipping a fresh coffee and laughing loudly on speakerphone. I knew without a doubt he was on the phone with Preston, celebrating my supposed downfall. Thorne quickly slammed his hand onto the receiver to end the call when he saw me standing in his doorway. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, interlacing his fingers with a deeply patronizing smirk. "Ms. Walker," he said, his tone dripping with fake Southern courtesy, "you cannot just barge into a government office. I understand you are highly emotional about your little construction delay, but regulatory compliance is a serious matter. We have to ensure the city is protected from fraudulent developers. I walked right up to his desk, planting my hands firmly on the polished wood and leaning over it. We both know there is absolutely nothing wrong with my compliance records, Gregory, I said, staring dead into his eyes. Preston asked you for a favor, and you abused your federal authority to shut down a $400 million project. You are playing a very dangerous game of corporate warfare for a man who is completely broke. Thorne laughed, shaking his head as if I had just told a hilarious joke. He stood up, trying to use his physical height to intimidate me. You have a massive amount of nerve coming into my office making wild accusations. Preston Sterling is a highly respected pillar of the Atlanta financial community. His family has been funding this city for generations. You, on the other hand, are a rookie playing with fire. He walked around the desk, stopping uncomfortably close to me. The stop work order remains in full effect until my team conducts a complete forensic audit of your finances. It could take 6 months, maybe 12. By the time we are finished, your lenders will seize that half-built tower, and Preston will gladly take it off their hands to salvage the neighborhood. Your father Marcus knows exactly how things work in this town, Simone. He knows his place, and you need to learn yours. Now get out of my office before I have security arrest you for trespassing. I did not move a single inch. I did not flinch. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick blue folder. I tossed it right onto his pristine desk, where it landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. 6 months is a very long time, Gregory, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. Almost as long as it takes to build a custom 6-bedroom vacation mansion on the pristine shores of Lake Lanier. You really should be more careful with your personal investments. I continued, slowly pacing around his office and admiring his expensive artwork. Did you honestly think nobody would notice that you funneled $2 million through a blind shell company to buy that prime waterfront property? You secured a high-risk construction loan through First National Bank, using Preston as a silent guarantor. And when Preston had his massive liquidity crisis yesterday, your luxury loan went into immediate default. I stopped beside him, watching sweat form along his brow. That Lake Lanier loan had already slipped into default when Preston's liquidity crisis hit. First National sold the distressed note and the security interest to Onyx during the same acquisition window in which I bought Preston's debt. That means I now control the foreclosure rights attached to your waterfront property, Gregory. The land, the unfinished house, the imported stone, and the private dock are all sitting behind a defaulted obligation my company now holds. Thorne stumbled back into his leather chair, all the color rapidly draining from his face. He opened the folder with shaking hands, reading the official transfer deeds and the bank default notices bearing his signature. You cannot do this, he gasped, his breathing growing shallow. That house is my entire retirement. My wife has been planning that build for 3 years. She will divorce me if we lose it. Then you better start planning how to keep your wife happy, I said, leaning down until we were eye to eye. Because if I do not have a signed, stamped, and fully authorized release order for Walker Tower in my hand, within the next 60 seconds I am calling my demolition crew. You have a choice. You can go down with Preston Sterling's sinking ship, or you can save your own skin. Choose right now. Thorne's hands were trembling violently as he grabbed his gold-plated pen. The illusion of his white old money privilege had been completely shattered by cold, hard financial leverage. He pulled the emergency release forms from his desk drawer, signed them frantically, and stamped them with the official city seal. He shoved the papers toward me, unable to even look me in the eye. Construction can resume immediately, he whispered, his voice entirely defeated. Just leave my house out of this. I turned on my heel and walked out of the office, leaving him completely destroyed in his chair. The elevator ride down to the main lobby felt like a victory lap. I had outsmarted a corrupt city official, bypassed my family toxic interference, and secured my legacy before 10 in the morning. I felt untouchable. But the moment the elevator doors slid open, my phone started vibrating violently in my pocket. My screen was completely filled with missed calls and frantic text messages from my business partner, Jordan. I answered the phone on the first ring, expecting to share the good news. Jordan, we are clear, I announced proudly, stepping into the bustling lobby. The stop work order is officially lifted. Tell the site managers to get the crews back on site. Turn on channel 2, Jordan yelled, his voice panicked and out of breath. Simone, do not go anywhere, just turn on the morning news right now. They are destroying you. I stopped walking and looked up at the massive television screens hanging above the City Hall reception desk. My heart dropped violently into my stomach. There was my sister Chloe sitting on the velvet couch of Atlanta, most watched morning talk show. She was weeping uncontrollably, clutching a tissue and looking directly into the camera with big, innocent eyes. Beside her sat my mother Vivian, placing a comforting hand on Chloe's shoulder and looking appropriately devastated. The breaking news headline flashing across the bottom of the screen read, Atlanta billionaire built empire on stolen family funds and severe mental illness. Chloe dabbed at her fake tears, taking a deep, dramatic breath for the cameras. My sister Simone has been battling severe schizophrenia for years, Chloe told the shocked news anchor, her voice trembling with perfectly manufactured grief. We kept it a family secret to protect her dignity, but she refused treatment and completely lost her grip on reality. My mother nodded solemnly, wiping away a tear of her own. We tried so hard to help her, Vivian added, looking straight into the lens. But she manipulated our family business accounts. She stole our entire life savings to fund this delusional construction project. She believes she is some kind of real estate mogul, but she is deeply sick. We just want to get her the psychiatric help she desperately needs before she hurts herself or anyone else. Chloe pleaded, her voice breaking on cue. Please, if anyone sees Simone, approach her with extreme caution. We love her, and we just want to bring her home to a hospital facility where she belongs. Jordan gripped my arm, his voice tight with panic. The board is calling an emergency meeting, Simone. The equity partners are threatening to pull the funding for Walker Tower immediately. They want you out by noon or they liquidate the assets. I took a deep breath, forcing the shock out of my system. Let them try, I said, my voice ice cold. Call the driver. We are going to the office. Before I could even take my seat at the head of the table, David Harrington, the lead representative for our largest private equity firm, slammed his portfolio shut. Simone, this is a public relations catastrophe. Your own mother and sister just went on a syndicated morning show and claimed you stole the initial capital for Walker Tower. They are implying that your legal claim to this company is entirely fraudulent and that you are mentally unfit to stand trial, let alone manage a $400 million real estate development. I remained standing, projecting absolute authority. David, you have seen the audited financials. You know exactly where every single dime of my capital originated. It is a fabricated smear campaign designed by my brother-in-law to seize control of this firm. The truth does not matter when the optics are this disastrous. Another board member shot back, her tone laced with panic. The city will halt our permits again out of sheer caution. The banks will freeze our credit lines by the end of the day. We cannot have a CEO who is publicly fighting a mental health conservatorship battle with her prominent family. We have a fiduciary duty to protect this company. We are asking for your immediate resignation, Simone. Step down and let us install an interim director until this scandal blows over. I opened my mouth to respond, but the heavy boardroom doors suddenly swung wide open. The room fell dead silent as my father, Marcus Sr., strutted into the room entirely uninvited. He was flanked by 3 high-priced corporate lawyers, and right beside him, walking with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed he owned the world, was Preston. My white brother-in-law wore a custom navy suit and a smug smile that made my blood boil. Gentlemen, my father announced, his deep voice commanding the attention of every investor in the room. I apologize for the intrusion, but as the patriarch of the Walker family, I felt it was my duty to step in and resolve this unfortunate domestic tragedy. I glared at my father, my hands gripping the edge of the table. You have absolutely no legal right to be in this building, Dad. Get out before I call security. Preston chuckled, a dry, patronizing sound that grated against my nerves. He stepped forward, placing a pristine leather briefcase directly onto the conference table. Now, Simone, let us not make a scene in front of your investors. You have been through a terrible mental break, and your family is here to rescue you. We are here to rescue all of you, actually. Preston turned his attention to the board members, spreading his hands in a gesture of false magnanimity. I am Preston Sterling. You know my family name. You know our venture capital firm. We understand that Onyx Holdings is currently facing a catastrophic liquidity crisis due to my sister-in-law erratic behavior. However, the Sterling Fund is prepared to inject $50 million in emergency bridge capital by the close of business today to stabilize this project. We will also issue a public press release confirming that Walker Tower is officially under the management of the Sterling Family Trust, instantly repairing your relationship with the city inspectors and the banks. David Harrington leaned forward, clearly tempted by the lifeline. And what exactly are your terms, Mr. Sterling? Preston smiled, his blue eyes flashing with malicious triumph. It is quite simple. Simone signs a full transfer of her voting rights and executive authority over to me. She steps down immediately. In return, my family agrees not to press criminal charges against her for the funds she misappropriated from Walker Logistics. We will place her in a very comfortable private psychiatric facility where she can get the care she desperately needs. The board gets to keep their investment, and the Walker Tower gets built under proper management. My father nodded solemnly, playing the role of the heartbroken but responsible parent to absolute perfection. It is the only way to save her from herself, he said, his voice dripping with fake sorrow. She is sick. We just want to protect her and protect the reputation of this city. Simone David Harrington said, his tone dropping into a patronizing register. This is a very generous offer from your family. It protects the asset and it protects you. Sign the transfer agreement. Preston pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase and slid them across the polished walnut table. He placed a heavy gold fountain pen right on top of the signature line. His smile was so wide it looked like it might crack his face in half. He truly believed he had won. He believed that the combined weight of white privilege, patriarchal authority, and corporate greed had successfully crushed me into submission. It is over, Simone, Preston whispered, leaning over the table so only I could hear his venomous tone. I told you I would take everything from you. Sign the paper and go quietly. I let out a soft, defeated sigh. I picked up the heavy gold pen. I let my shoulders slump forward, perfectly mimicking the posture of a woman who had completely given up the fight. I uncapped the pen and leaned over the document. The boardroom was so quiet, I could hear my own steady breathing. I pressed the nib of the pen against the thick paper, but I did not sign my name. Instead, I reached into the hidden inner pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a single sheet of stark white paper folded neatly in thirds. I opened it and placed it directly over Preston's transfer agreement, covering his meticulously drafted hostile takeover with my own document. I capped the gold pen and set it down. What are you doing? Preston snapped, his smug facade faltering for a split second. Stop stalling and sign the damn contract. I did not stall, Preston, I said, my voice suddenly ringing with absolute terrifying clarity. I just gave you something much more valuable. Preston frowned, reaching out and snatching the document I had placed on the table. He scanned the bold black text at the top of the page. The blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly painted corpse. His hands began to shake so violently the paper rattled loudly in the silent room. What is it? My father demanded, stepping closer to look over Preston's shoulder. What does it say? It is a federal subpoena, Preston, I announced, projecting my voice so every single investor in the boardroom could hear me clearly. Specifically, it is an official mandate from the Federal Bureau of Investigation demanding your immediate appearance regarding multiple counts of wire fraud, international money laundering, and the embezzlement of $50 million from your venture capital investors. You see, I continued, circling the table with the grace of an apex predator. While you were busy having my mother cry on television this morning, I was having a very productive breakfast with the regional director of the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. I handed over the entire flash drive of your offshore transactions. The same transactions you foolishly tried to cover up by exploiting my father logistics company. You are a walking crime scene, Preston, I said, stopping right beside him. And you brought that crime scene directly into my boardroom. The federal agents are currently raiding your corporate offices in Boston as we speak. They have frozen every single asset tied to the Sterling name, which means your generous offer to bail out my company is completely worthless. You are entirely bankrupt, and by the end of the day, you will be wearing handcuffs. I nodded to Jordan, who was already tapping rapidly on his tablet. We had anticipated Preston would try to run the moment his pristine facade shattered. What Preston did not know was that when Onyx Holdings acquired his defaulted debt, we also gained immense legal leverage and access to audit his corporate communication networks. Jordan had our cybersecurity team tracking every single move Preston made on his company-issued devices. We watched the live security feed on Jordan's screen as Preston burst into the underground parking garage. He was sweating profusely, pacing furiously between rows of luxury vehicles. He pulled out his phone and made a frantic call. Jordan hit a button, and the audio feed from Preston's phone routed directly into the secure speakers in our boardroom. "Martin, pick up the damn phone!" Preston barked, his voice echoing against the concrete walls of the garage. "I need you to initiate Protocol Epsilon right now. Transfer everything remaining in the domestic shadow accounts to the Cayman Islands Trust. Yes, all of it. I do not care about the early withdrawal penalties or the flagging system. The FBI is raiding the Boston office as we speak. Wash the funds through the shell corporations we set up in Panama and destroy the domestic ledgers immediately." I listened to the pure, unfiltered desperation in his voice. He was actively committing international money laundering and obstruction of justice while standing in the parking lot of my own building. He was digging his own grave deeper with every single word. Jordan looked at me with a triumphant smile, giving a quick nod. We had the audio file secured, encrypted, and ready for delivery. "Send that recording directly to Special Agent Carter," I told Jordan, smoothing the front of my tailored jacket. "I want Preston Sterling intercepted before he can even reach the private airstrip." Jordan nodded, connecting his encrypted drive to my personal laptop. He had just initiated the transfer protocol when my heavy oak office door swung open. The sudden intrusion made me jump. My security desk was supposed to be on high alert. But the woman standing in the doorway was not someone my security team would typically tackle to the ground. It was my mother. Vivian Walker looked absolutely nothing like the proud, arrogant matriarch who had sat at my parents' anniversary dinner less than 24 hours earlier. Her designer silk blouse was violently wrinkled. Her immaculate makeup was smudged with dark streaks of mascara running down her cheeks. She looked completely shattered, a hollow shell of the woman who usually ruled the Atlanta Black elite. "Jordan," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the woman who had spent my entire life making me feel completely invisible. "Give us a minute. Simone, please," she wailed, her voice cracking with raw agony. "Please, you have to stop this. You have made your point. You have proven you are the smartest and the most powerful. But if you give that recording to the police, you will not just be sending Preston to prison. You will be sending your father too." I stood up from my desk, my heart pounding aggressively against my ribs. "What are you talking about?" My mother looked up at me, her eyes bloodshot and pleading. "The bridge loan, Simone. Your father did not just sign a guarantee. Preston convinced him to co-sign the transfer documents for the offshore accounts. He told your father it was a standard procedure to avoid heavy luxury taxes. If the FBI hears that audio file, they will trace the initial capital straight back to Walker Logistics. They will arrest your father as an accomplice to international money laundering. He will die in a federal prison, Simone. He is an old man." "Simone, I am begging you," Vivian cried, crawling forward on her knees until she was right at the edge of my desk. "I know I have been a terrible mother. I know I favored Chloe. I know I pushed you away because your independence terrified me. I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. You are the strongest person in this family. You are the only one who can save us. Please do not let them take your father away in handcuffs. I will do anything. I will sign away my rights to the family estate. I will publicly apologize. Just please do not send that audio file to the FBI." "Mom, get up," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "Please get off the floor. You are having a severe panic attack. I cannot breathe." She gasped, clutching her chest, her breathing growing dangerously shallow. "Simone, I need water. Please, I cannot catch my breath." I quickly stepped out from behind my desk. "Stay right there," I told her, rushing toward the small private kitchenette on the other side of my spacious office. I grabbed a crystal tumbler and turned on the filtered water dispenser. My back was turned to her for exactly 15 seconds. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my own racing heart while the glass filled. I was running complex calculations in my head, trying to figure out how to give the FBI Preston without causing collateral damage to my father. I turned around, the cold glass of water in my hand. "Mom, here, take this." But the space in front of my desk was completely empty. I blinked, staring at the plush carpet where she had just been sobbing uncontrollably. I looked up just in time to see the heavy oak door to my office clicking shut. The tears, the hyperventilating, the desperate apologies. They were all gone. I dropped the glass. It shattered against the hardwood floor of the kitchenette, sending water and crystal flying everywhere. I sprinted back to my desk and slammed my hand down on the security playback button on my monitor to see exactly what had just happened in those 15 seconds. The high-definition camera footage showed my mother, tears instantly vanishing from her face the second I turned my back. She moved with terrifying speed and precision. She pulled a sleek black USB drive from her designer pocket and jammed it directly into my unlocked laptop. The screen captured her rapid keystrokes. She had not just stolen the audio file of Preston making his parking lot phone call, she had used an administrative override command. She downloaded the master architectural blueprints for Walker Tower, alongside the proprietary structural schematics that were the absolute lifeblood of my entire $400 million investment. The security footage showed her yanking the drive out, slipping it back into her pocket, and darting out the door with a cold, calculating smirk on her face. I barely slept that night, pacing the floors of my office while my legal team tried to preempt whatever move Preston was going to make next. I did not have to wait long to find out. At 8 in the morning, every major news network in Atlanta cut to a live press broadcast from the steps of the Fulton County Courthouse. I stood in front of my office television, watching my entire family line up behind a podium like a perfectly styled mafia cartel. Preston stood front and center, looking completely revitalized. The panic from yesterday was entirely gone from his face. Vivian stood next to him wearing a somber black dress, while Marcus Sr. and Chloe flanked them, looking like the aggrieved victims of a massive tragedy. Preston leaned into the cluster of microphones. "Today we are taking the necessary legal steps to reclaim what rightfully belongs to the Walker family," he announced, his voice projecting absolute righteous indignation. "For years, my sister-in-law Simone has presented herself as a self-made real estate mogul. But the truth is far more sinister. We have recently uncovered irrefutable evidence that the entire structural design and financial modeling for Walker Tower were illegally obtained using the proprietary resources and intellectual property of Walker Logistics." My jaw tightened as Preston held up a thick bound document. The camera zoomed in. It was my blueprint. The exact proprietary schematics my mother had stolen from my laptop just yesterday. Preston continued his character assassination without missing a beat. Simone used her family company as a personal piggy bank and design firm, secretly draining their resources to build her own empire. But her deceit goes much deeper than corporate theft. She has violated the sacred trust of her own ancestors. Preston stepped aside, allowing my father to take the podium. Marcus Sr. adjusted his glasses, looking out at the reporters with a practiced look of sorrow. He pulled an aged, yellowed piece of paper from his suit pocket. "This is the original last will and testament of my late father, the founder of our family legacy," Marcus said, his voice trembling with fake emotion. "For years, this document was thought to be lost. We just discovered it hidden in Simone's personal safe." I stared at the screen in absolute disbelief. I had never owned a safe containing any family documents. My father held the forged paper up for the cameras. My father explicitly wrote that any and all commercial real estate ventures developed using Walker family capital or resources remain the sole property of the family patriarch. He designed this clause to protect our Black generational wealth from being squandered by rogue descendants. Under the legal parameters of this newly discovered will, Simone owns absolutely nothing. Walker Tower, Onyx Holdings, and all associated assets legally belong to me, and by extension, to the management of our family trust, directed by Preston. The reporters shouted questions asking if they planned to press criminal charges against me. Chloe stepped up to the microphone, wiping away a fake tear. "We just want our sister to get the psychiatric help she needs," Chloe said, staring directly into the camera lens. "We are reclaiming our stolen property, but we will not abandon her to her illness." Before he could explain, my lead corporate attorney burst through the doors. The legal team was in full crisis mode. The forged will and stolen blueprints had been submitted to Judge Harrison that morning. He was a Fulton County judge who regularly played golf at Preston's Country Club, and he had already entertained their emergency ownership petition. The judge granted an emergency ex parte injunction. My lawyer explained, pacing the floor rapidly. They filed a civil racketeering lawsuit against you. The judge ordered an immediate temporary freeze on all your personal and corporate assets, pending a full investigation into the stolen intellectual property and the contested will. I pulled my wallet from my bag and pulled out my black corporate card. What exactly do you mean by a freeze? I asked, though I already knew the terrifying answer. I mean everything, Simone, the lawyer said grimly. Your bank accounts, your investment portfolios, your credit lines, even the payroll accounts for Onyx Holdings. You cannot authorize a single transaction. Furthermore, court officers are already at the Walker Tower construction site changing the locks and shutting down the block. Your site access has been suspended until the ownership dispute is heard in court. I need to get to my apartment, I told Jordan, grabbing my coat. I have emergency cash stashed in my home safe. We need to hire forensic experts to prove that will is a forgery, and we need to do it immediately. I will meet you at the backup office in 2 hours. I rushed out of the building, keeping my head down to avoid the local reporters who were already swarming the lobby of Onyx Holdings. I hailed a cab on the street, giving the driver the address of my luxury penthouse. When we arrived, I handed the driver my corporate credit card to pay the fare. The machine beeped a harsh, angry sound. Declined. I tried my personal debit card. Declined. The driver looked at me through the rearview mirror, clearly annoyed. The asset freeze was already active across the entire global banking network. I felt a flush of deep humiliation as I dug through my purse, scraping together enough physical cash to cover the ride and a tip. It was the last $30 to my name. There, spread across the dirty concrete sidewalk, was my entire life. Standing right in the middle of my ruined belongings was Chloe. What did you do? I demanded, my voice dropping to a lethal calm as I stepped over a pile of my own dresses. I did what you should have done a long time ago, little sister Chloe sneered, lowering her sunglasses to look me up and down. I diversified my portfolio. Did you really think you were the only one who could play the real estate game? When Preston secured that emergency injunction this morning, he also managed to free up a tiny fraction of his offshore liquidity, just enough for me to make a very generous cash offer to the management company that owns this building. I stared at her, the reality of her cruelty hitting me harder than a physical blow. You bought my apartment. I bought the entire top floor. Chloe corrected, her smile widening into a malicious grin. Which makes me your new landlord. And unfortunately for you, I have a very strict zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent tenants with frozen bank accounts. I initiated an immediate eviction protocol. She gestured vaguely to the trash bags littering the sidewalk. I packed your things for you. I hope you do not mind that a few of those cheap suits got ruined in the process. You can consider it a tax for all the stress you put our parents through this week. You are destroying your own family for a man who is using you, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady, despite the rage burning in my chest. When Preston goes down, he is going to take you right down with him. You are signing your own death warrant. Chloe laughed, a sharp, arrogant sound that echoed off the glass building. The only person going down is you, Simone. You have no money. You have no company. You have absolutely no power left. You are exactly what you always were, the poor sister. Pick up your trash, Simone, she called over her shoulder, not even bothering to look back at me. Go live under a bridge, billionaire. I knelt down and dug through the trash bags, ignoring the curious stares of passing pedestrians. I abandoned the ruined designer dresses and the expensive shoes. I only searched for what mattered. I found my emergency backup hard drive shoved inside a torn leather handbag and a single unwrinkled charcoal suit safely encased in its protective garment bag. I slung the garment bag over my shoulder, tucked the hard drive under my arm, and walked away from the luxury high-rise without looking back. There was only one person in the world who hated Preston as much as I did. Her name was Victoria Wentworth. She was Preston's ex-wife, a true blue-blooded aristocrat from one of the oldest and wealthiest families in Massachusetts. Preston had married her for her pedigree, drained several of her trust funds to launch his venture capital firm, and then dragged her through a humiliating, highly publicized divorce when the initial money ran out. She despised him with a burning passion that no amount of time could extinguish. I used the motel's spotty internet connection to track down her private office number. Getting past her executive assistant took every ounce of corporate negotiation skill I possessed. But the moment I mentioned I had the financial blueprints to Preston's current venture capital fund, Victoria agreed to meet me. The next afternoon, I walked into the private dining room of the most exclusive country club in Buckhead, wearing the only clean charcoal suit I had salvaged from the street. Victoria Wentworth was already seated at a secluded corner table sipping a dry martini. She was a striking woman in her late 40s, with sharp features, ice blue eyes, and an aura of effortless inherited power. She looked me up and down as I took the seat across from her. "I must admit, Simone, you have incredible nerve," Victoria said, her voice smooth and dangerously polite. "I saw the morning news. Your family is executing a remarkably vicious smear campaign against you. To show your face in a place like this while your bank accounts are actively frozen takes a special kind of audacity. I did not come here to discuss my family drama." "Victoria," I said, leaning forward and resting my hands on the pristine white tablecloth. "I came here to discuss the mutual extermination of Preston Sterling. I know you have been tracking his offshore accounts since the divorce. He just leveraged a corrupt judge to freeze $400 million of my assets. I need your financial intelligence to break the injunction." Victoria took another slow sip of her martini, her eyes locking onto mine with a predatory gleam. She reached down to the empty chair beside her and picked up a thick leather-bound portfolio. She placed it squarely in the middle of the table. She opened the portfolio and turned the folder toward me. I looked down at the neatly organized spreadsheets and banking manifests. What I saw made my blood run instantly cold. "Preston is not just broke," Simone Victoria explained, pointing a manicured finger at a series of highlighted transactions. "He is actively washing money for 3 different international shell corporations that are currently under investigation by the Treasury Department. He lost $50 million in the crypto crash, just like you discovered. But he did not just borrow money from your father logistics company to cover it up. He needed a clean domestic vehicle to wash the incoming offshore funds so he could pay back his dangerous investors. These are charity accounts," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs as I read the name listed on the bank statements. "Exactly," Victoria said, leaning back in her chair with a grim expression. "Preston convinced your mother to appoint him as the financial director of her beloved high society charity foundation. Your mother thinks she is receiving massive anonymous donations from wealthy philanthropists for her annual galas. She has been bragging about her record-breaking fundraising all over town. But in reality, Preston is using her nonprofit status as a massive tax-exempt washing machine. If the federal authorities audit this foundation, your mother is the sole signatory on all the receiving accounts," Victoria stated coldly. "Preston has legally insulated himself. When the federal indictments come down, Vivian Walker will be the one facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for international money laundering. He set her up as the perfect disposable patsy." "You give me this evidence, Victoria," I said, looking directly into her ice blue eyes. "You give me the paper trail that proves he is the architect of the laundering scheme, and I promise you I will hand-deliver him to the FBI. He will never touch another dime of anyone's money again." Victoria smiled a cold, sharp smile. "Consider it a gift," she said, sliding the portfolio across the table. "Burn him to ashes, Simone." I returned to the dingy motel late that evening, clutching the leather portfolio like a shield. I sat on the uncomfortable bed, reviewing the banking manifests over and over again. I held the power to destroy Preston completely, but using this evidence also meant exposing my mother Charity as a criminal enterprise. I had to calculate a way to trap Preston without sending my parents to federal prison. They had betrayed me, but I refused to become a collateral murderer. The heavy silence of the motel room was suddenly shattered by 3 frantic knocks at my door. Standing in the flickering light of the neon motel sign was Chloe, my older sister, the golden child. The woman who had just evicted me and thrown my belongings onto the street was standing outside my door, looking absolutely terrified. I kept the security chain engaged and opened the door just a crack. "How did you find me?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the heavy brass lamp. Chloe pressed her hands against the door, her face pale and streaked with ruined makeup. She was wearing a heavy trench coat hastily thrown over a pair of silk pajamas. She kept looking over her shoulder toward the dark parking lot, as if she expected someone to jump out from the shadows. "Preston put a GPS tracker on your phone months ago," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling violently. "I memorized his password. I tracked you here. Simone, please, you have to let me in. He is going to kill me." Chloe stumbled into the room, bringing the smell of cold rain and expensive perfume with her. I quickly locked the deadbolt behind her and turned to face her. "What kind of game are you playing now, Chloe?" I asked, keeping my distance. "Did Preston send you here to record me? Are you trying to trap me into violating the judge asset freeze injunction?" "No," Chloe sobbed, pulling her trench coat tighter around her trembling body. "I was packing for a celebratory weekend trip. I went into his private study to find my passport. He left his personal floor safe unlocked. I found his burner phone, Simone. I read the messages." She reached into her cheap plastic smartphone, tossing it onto the lumpy motel bed. "He is not just broke," Chloe cried, her voice pitching into a hysterical whisper. "He has a mistress in the Cayman Islands. They have been planning this for a year. The emergency injunction he filed this morning was not about taking over Walker Tower to save the family. He just needed the courts to unfreeze his remaining domestic assets so he could access the liquidity." Chloe looked up at me, her eyes wide with absolute horror. "He booked a private flight out of Atlanta for tomorrow night. It is a one-way ticket for a single passenger. He is taking all the cash he just liberated from the injunction, and he is fleeing the country. He is leaving me here to face the federal investigators alone. He is going to let me and Mom take the fall for all the missing money." Chloe sank onto the edge of the mattress, burying her face in her hands. "I gave him everything," she wept. "I turned against you. I stole your apartment. I helped him forge that stupid will because he promised me we would rule the city together. And now he is leaving me to go to prison." "You told me he was going to take me down with him," Chloe said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You were right, Simone. You were right about everything. I know you hate me. I know I deserve it. But if he gets on that plane tomorrow night, we both lose everything. I know where he keeps the master access keys to the offshore accounts," she said. "I can get you inside his private server before he leaves for the airport. We can freeze the transfer and trap him here. But I need your help to do it. Help me destroy my husband, Simone, and I will give you your company back." I stepped back, avoiding her touch as if she were toxic. "I do not need you," I said, pulling the door open and gesturing to the dark parking lot. "I have the entire financial blueprint of his money laundering operation right here in this room. I am going to burn Preston to the ground, and anyone standing next to him is going to catch fire. Now get out of my room before I call the police and tell them exactly where you are hiding." Chloe sobbed a harsh, ugly sound, but she saw the absolute finality in my eyes. She pulled her trench coat tight and stumbled out into the cold night, leaving me alone with my ammunition. I locked the deadbolt and immediately called Jordan. I told him to digitize every single banking manifest Victoria Wentworth had given me. We had a charity gala to ruin. The annual Walker Foundation Gala was the crown jewel of the Atlanta High Society calendar. My mother, Vivian, had rented out the grand ballroom of the Biltmore Hotel. It was a sea of custom tuxedos, designer evening gowns, and flowing champagne. The city's most prominent politicians, real estate developers, and generational wealth inheritors were all gathered in one room, eager to write massive tax-deductible checks to prove their philanthropic status. I did not have a ticket. My bank accounts were completely frozen. But I still possessed the master override codes for the audiovisual production company that my firm had routinely hired for corporate events. Jordan and I sat in my rented sedan parked in the alleyway behind the hotel. My laptop was connected to the hotel's secure network. Then Preston took the stage. The white savior of the Walker family tapped the microphone, and the grand ballroom fell into a respectful silence. He adjusted his expensive tuxedo jacket and smiled a bright, blinding smile that hid a desperate fugitive preparing to flee the country. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Preston announced, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. When Vivian asked me to step in as the financial director of this foundation, I was deeply humbled. My family in Boston has always believed that wealth is a responsibility. It is our duty to uplift those who are struggling. Tonight, we are raising funds for community development programs right here in Atlanta. Every dollar you donate tonight goes directly into building a brighter future for the underprivileged. Hit it, I told Jordan, my finger hovering over the enter key. Inside the grand ballroom, Preston turned toward the massive digital projection screen behind him. And now I would like to show you a brief video highlighting exactly where your generous donations are going, he said, gesturing broadly. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The crowd turned their attention to the screen. But instead of a heartwarming video of smiling children, the screen flashed bright, blinding white. A high-pitched feedback squeal pierced through the speakers, making several guests cover their ears. Then the image resolved into sharp, crystal-clear focus. It was not a charity video. It was a high-resolution scan of a Cayman Islands banking ledger. The documents on the screen began to scroll automatically, highlighting specific transactions in bright fluorescent yellow. A recorded audio file began to play over the ballroom sound system. It was the exact recording of Preston from the parking garage. Transfer everything, remaining in the domestic shadow accounts, to the Cayman Islands Trust. Preston's own, frantic voice echoed off the gilded ceiling of the Biltmore Hotel. Yes, all of it. Wash the funds through the shell corporations we set up in Panama and destroy the domestic ledgers immediately. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Mayors, council members, and private investors stared at the screen in pure, unadulterated horror. They were looking at their own charitable donations, their $5,000 and $10,000 checks being routed directly from Vivian Walker nonprofit accounts into offshore shell companies controlled entirely by Preston Sterling. "Shut it down!" Preston screamed, sprinting toward the side of the stage, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "Cut the power! Cut the damn power right now!" But Jordan had locked the system. The screen shifted to a new document. It was Preston booked flight itinerary. A one-way private charter to the Cayman Islands scheduled to depart at midnight tonight. Single passenger. The panic was instantaneous and violent. High society etiquette evaporated in a single second. Wealthy donors began shouting, demanding their checks back. People were pulling out their cell phones, calling their bankers, their lawyers, and the police. The glittering gala had instantly transformed into a crime scene. I watched my mother Vivian clutch her chest and collapse into a chair, hyperventilating as the women she had spent decades trying to impress turned on her with vicious accusations. She was the sole signatory on the charity accounts. She was going to take the fall for all of it. I stepped out of the sedan and walked through the service entrance of the hotel. I wanted to see the destruction with my own eyes. I pushed through the swinging kitchen doors and stepped into the grand lobby just outside the ballroom. The doors to the ballroom burst open, and attendees began flooding into the lobby, frantically trying to escape the scandal. Then Preston burst through the crowd. He was sweating profusely, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his tie ripped loose. He was running toward the main exit, his eyes wild with the desperate, frantic energy of a trapped animal. He had lost his money, his reputation, and his escape plan in less than 2 minutes. I was standing perfectly still in the center of the lobby, wearing my single clean charcoal suit. I did not run. I did not flinch. I just looked at him and offered a small, satisfied smile. "You," he roared, his voice echoing over the screams of the fleeing guests. "You did this to me, you miserable witch." He did not call for the hotel security. He turned to the 3 massive private bodyguards he had hired for his own personal protection. They were big, brutal men paid in cash to handle Preston dirty work. "Grab her," Preston screamed, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "Break her legs. I want her completely destroyed." The 3 men lunged forward, pushing through the chaotic crowd. I tried to step back, but they moved with terrifying speed. One of them grabbed my arm, twisting it violently behind my back until my shoulder popped. I cried out in pain, stumbling forward. Another guard grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head back so hard my vision blurred. They dragged me toward the marble pillars of the lobby, away from the main exit doors. A heavy fist slammed into my stomach, driving all the air from my lungs. I doubled over, gasping for breath, but the guard holding my arms jerked me upright again. A second punch caught me across the cheekbone, splitting my skin against my teeth. The metallic taste of my own blood flooded my mouth. I kicked out wildly, my heel connecting with a guard's shin, but it barely slowed them down. They were professional thugs executing a paid beating right in the middle of a high society event. Through the blur of pain and panic, I looked up. Standing just 10 feet away near the ballroom entrance was my father. Marcus Sr. was watching the entire scene unfold. He saw the blood pouring from my lip. He saw the massive men holding his daughter, twisting my limbs and preparing to strike me again. Dad. I choked out the word, tearing from my throat, raw and desperate. Please. My father looked directly into my eyes. He saw my terror. He saw my pain. And then he looked at Preston, who was standing near the exit, furiously dialing his phone, trying to salvage his escape. My father faced the ultimate choice. He could step forward, risk his own safety, and protect his child, or he could stand down and hope that Preston still had enough power to save the family logistics company from bankruptcy. Marcus Sr. made his choice. He slowly turned his head, looking away from me, and stared blankly at the floor. He did nothing. He stood by and watched his own flesh and blood get beaten in a hotel lobby to protect a white man who had already destroyed them all. Another fist collided with my ribs, sending me crashing to the cold marble floor. I curled into a ball, protecting my head as a heavy boot slammed into my side. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the absolute death of my heart. In that moment, as I lay bleeding on the floor of the Biltmore Hotel, the last remaining thread of love I held for my family completely snapped. They were not my blood anymore. They were my enemies, and I was going to bury them all. The heavy boot aimed at my ribs never connected. A massive hand clamped onto the guard's collar, yanking him backward with such violent force that his boots actually lifted off the polished marble floor. My private security detail had finally breached the lobby. I had hired them weeks ago, sourcing top-tier ex-military operatives led by a man named Malik. I had specifically ordered them to hold the perimeter and remain completely invisible until Preston made a definitive criminal move. Now they were entirely off the leash. Malik swept the first thug's legs out from under him, driving a knee into his chest while pinning his arms behind his back. My other two guards neutralized the remaining attackers in a matter of seconds, slamming them face first into the gilded columns of the Biltmore Hotel. The sickening crunch of bone meeting marble echoed through the terrified lobby. Preston's cheap hired muscle was immobilized, zip-tied and groaning on the floor before the hotel management could even process what had just occurred. I pushed myself up from the cold floor. Every muscle in my torso screamed in agony, and the metallic taste of blood was thick and heavy on my tongue. Malik reached out a steady hand to help me stand, his sharp eyes scanning my split lip and bruised cheekbone. He quietly asked if I needed an ambulance. I shook my head, wiping the blood from my chin with the back of my hand. I did not need a doctor. I needed to finish the execution. I turned my gaze to my parents. Marcus Sr. and Vivian were standing frozen near the heavy mahogany ballroom doors. They had watched the entire brutal assault unfold. They had watched grown men beat their youngest daughter, and they had not taken a single step forward to intervene. Vivian was clutching her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with sheer terror, not for my safety, but for the escalating public scandal unfolding in front of her high society peers. Marcus Sr. looked away, unable to meet my eyes, acting like a coward hiding behind his expensive custom tuxedo. The last fragile thread connecting me to them snapped. It was a clean, silent break inside my chest. I felt no sorrow. I felt no anger. I only felt an absolute freezing emptiness where my family used to reside. Preston was backed into a corner, his face pale with panic. He looked from his subdued thugs to Malik's team and realized brute force had failed. He tried to bolt for the service elevator, but two Atlanta police officers arriving to investigate the assault blocked his path. They could hold the attackers, but no federal arrest warrant for Preston had been issued yet. I ignored Preston entirely. He was already a dead man walking. I walked slowly toward my parents. My heels clicked against the marble, a steady rhythmic sound that made my father flinch. Marcus, I said, dropping the title of father forever. You made your choice. You chose to protect a parasite because his skin color and his old money Boston last name made you feel important. You traded your own flesh and blood for a seat at a table that will never actually accept you. Vivian stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out toward me. Simone, please, you are bleeding. Let us get you a doctor. We did not know he was going to hurt you. Do not touch me. I commanded, my voice slicing through the air like a razor. You knew exactly what he was capable of. You knew he was laundering money through your charity, and you knew he was stealing from your own company. But you loved the illusion of wealth more than you loved me. I pulled my phone from my tailored pocket. The screen was cracked from the fall, but it still functioned perfectly. I looked at the encrypted notification from Jordan. The data packets were prepped, loaded, and waiting for my command. You spent my entire life telling me I was the poor sister, I said, staring directly into Marcus's eyes. You told me I was a massive disappointment because I refused to work for Walker Logistics. You used that company as a weapon to control this family, so I am taking the weapon away. I tapped the screen and initiated the master broadcast protocol. What did you just do? Marcus demanded, a new wave of panic washing over his aging face as his own cell phone suddenly began to vibrate wildly in his pocket. I just released the complete unredacted financial portfolio of Walker Logistics to the Wall Street Journal, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and every major banking regulator in the state of Georgia, I stated coldly. I released the signed documents proving that you illegally cross-collateralized your corporate assets to secure Preston's fraudulent offshore loans. I exposed the hidden debt, the falsified tax returns, and the shadow ledgers you used to hide his massive market losses. Vivian let out a strangled, horrific cry, burying her face in her hands. Marcus stumbled backward, clutching his chest, just as he had in the boardroom. You cannot do that, he gasped, struggling to breathe. The banks will call in the loans immediately. They will freeze our operating accounts. They already have, I replied, checking the automated confirmation receipt on my cracked screen. As of 60 seconds ago, Walker Logistics has zero liquidity. Your corporate credit rating is junk. Your vendors will not get paid tomorrow morning, and your lenders are already drafting the foreclosure notices. You are completely, undeniably bankrupt. I turned and walked out of the Biltmore Hotel, flanked by Malik and my security team. The 3 hired guards were being loaded into squad cars on assault charges, while Preston stood behind a frantic attorney shouting that he had done nothing and refusing questions. No federal arrest warrant had reached the scene. I climbed into my waiting SUV, closed my eyes against the pain in my ribs, and understood the financial war was entering its final legal phase. The next morning, the bright Atlanta sun rose over the prestigious Buckhead neighborhood, casting a warm, golden glow over the sprawling estates of the Black elite. Inside the Walker family mega mansion, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The grand dining room, usually a place of boastful conversations and lavish breakfasts, felt exactly like a funeral parlor. Chloe sat slumped in a chair, wrapped in a designer silk robe, staring blankly at the wall. She had been crying for hours. Preston had not come home after the gala. His attorneys had moved him to an undisclosed hotel, while federal investigators froze accounts tied to his fund and reviewed the evidence. Chloe was beginning to understand that her husband's freedom was hanging by a thread, his money was disappearing by the hour, and prison was no longer an abstract threat. This cannot be happening, Chloe muttered, her voice hoarse and broken. Preston promised he had a contingency plan. He promised we were moving to the Cayman Islands. He was moving to the Cayman Islands with his mistress. Vivian snapped bitterly, dropping her spoon onto the saucer. I was going to leave you here to face the federal indictments alone. Simone was right about everything, and now we are entirely ruined. His desperate delusion was violently interrupted by heavy authoritative pounding on the massive oak front doors. He yanked the double doors open, preparing to yell at whatever local reporter or process server had dared to step onto his pristine property. But the words died instantly in his throat. Standing on the front porch was not a reporter. It was a team of county sheriff's deputies flanked by 3 representatives from First National Bank. They were wearing dark jackets and carrying thick stacks of court and foreclosure paperwork. Parked in the circular driveway blocking the extravagant water fountain were several official vehicles and a commercial moving truck. Marcus Walker, the lead bank representative, stated, his tone completely devoid of any respect or customary courtesy. We are here to execute an immediate foreclosure and asset seizure on this property. Due to the catastrophic default on your commercial cross-collateralization agreements, the bank is reclaiming all physical assets tied to the Walker Logistics portfolio. Marcus gripped the doorframe, his knuckles turning white. You cannot do this without a 30-day notice. This is my primary residence. The bank representative handed him a thick clipboard with a pen attached. The cross-collateral agreements you signed contain acceleration and possession clauses triggered by fraud and catastrophic default, he said. The bank obtained an emergency writ this morning. This property is now under foreclosure control. You and your family have exactly 1 hour to collect essential personal belongings and vacate. If you refuse, the sheriff's deputies will remove you under the court order. Chloe ran out of the dining room, panic radiating from every pore of her body. Where are we supposed to go? She shrieked, looking wildly at the marshals. My husband's accounts are frozen. We do not have any cash. We cannot just go out on the street. We are the Sterling family. Chloe did not waste a single second of her allotted hour helping our parents gather their belongings, while my mother collapsed onto the grand staircase in a puddle of uncontrollable tears, and my father argued fruitlessly with the stone-faced federal marshals. Chloe sprinted up the sweeping marble steps 2 at a time. She burst into the master suite she shared with Preston, tearing through the massive custom walk-in closet like a woman possessed. She ripped designer evening gowns from their hangers and threw them onto the floor, kicking aside thousands of dollars worth of imported shoes. She was not packing her designated single bag. She was hunting for her survival. She threw herself at the hidden wall safe behind Preston custom shoe rack, punching in the 6-digit code with trembling fingers. The heavy steel door popped open. She reached inside, expecting to grab the emergency stacks of physical cash and the bearer bonds Preston always kept for a rainy day. Her hands hit cold, empty steel. The safe was entirely cleaned out. Preston had emptied it before he fled to the charity gala last night, leaving her with absolutely nothing but the velvet lining. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream of pure rage, sweeping all the expensive colognes off his vanity and watching the glass shatter against the hardwood floor. She pulled her phone from her silk robe, frantically dialing her private wealth manager at the offshore bank. The line connected after 3 agonizing rings. She screamed into the receiver, demanding an immediate wire transfer of her personal trust fund to a secure domestic account. I am sorry, Mrs. Sterling, the wealth manager replied. His voice clipped and entirely unsympathetic. We received a federal asset freeze order from the United States Treasury Department 30 minutes ago. All accounts associated with the Sterling name have been completely locked down, pending a criminal racketeering investigation. You have 0 available liquidity. But as she sank to the floor amidst the shattered glass and ruined designer clothes, her eyes caught a small dark object shoved into the very back corner of the empty wall safe. Preston had been in such a frantic rush to empty the cash he had overlooked the most valuable item in the entire room. Chloe reached in and pulled out a small black leather-bound notebook. She flipped it open, her eyes widening as she scanned the handwritten pages. It was Preston Master Ledger. It contained the encrypted routing numbers, the offshore shell company designations, and the exact Swiss banking codes that bypassed the federal tracking systems. It was the digital map to the millions of dollars he had successfully washed before the FBI raided his firm. Preston had left his ultimate safety net behind. Chloe gripped the notebook to her chest, a twisted, manic smile breaking through her tears. She did not bother packing clothes. She did not say goodbye to our parents, who were currently being escorted out of their foreclosed mansion by armed guards. She slipped the black notebook into her coat pocket, grabbed her car keys, and marched out the back door. She was going to do what she always did. She was going to save herself by any means necessary. I was sitting in the temporary command center I had established on the ground floor of my backup corporate office. The room was buzzing with the quiet, intense energy of my legal team and financial analysts working to secure the newly acquired Walker Logistics assets. Jordan was standing next to my desk, running through the finalized foreclosure reports, when the heavy glass doors of the office suddenly swung open violently. Chloe stormed into the room, looking like a deranged ghost of her former self. Her silk robe was stained, her hair was a tangled mess, and her eyes were burning with a desperate feral energy. She marched directly past my stunned security personnel, slamming her hands down onto my desk. I have it, she demanded, her voice hoarse and commanding. I have the keys to the kingdom, Simone. She reached into her coat and slammed the black leather notebook onto the center of my desk. Preston Master Ledger, she said, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. Every single offshore account. Every Swiss banking code. Millions of dollars of untraceable liquid cash that the feds have not frozen yet, because they do not even know these specific accounts exist. I know you want this, Simone. This is the final nail in his coffin. This guarantees he spends the rest of his natural life in a concrete box. I looked at the black notebook, then back up at her. And what exactly makes you think I need that ledger to bury your husband? I already gave the FBI the audio confession. He is done. Because audio is circumstantial, Chloe snapped, leaning over the desk, her eyes wide and manic. High-priced lawyers can fight audio recordings. They can claim it was deep-faked or taken out of context. But this ledger provides the exact numerical paper trail of the stolen money. This makes his conviction absolute. You need this to ensure he never walks out of a courtroom again. I steepled my fingers, resting them on the desk. Let us assume you are right. What is your asking price for handing over evidence in an active federal investigation? Chloe stood up straight, adjusting her stained robe as if she were wearing a designer power suit. She looked down at me, trying to summon the old arrogance she used to wield like a weapon. I want 20% equity in Walker Tower, she stated firmly. I want a seat on the board of Onyx Holdings, and I want immediate access to a $2 million expense account. You give me my rightful place in this empire, and I hand over the notebook. We destroy Preston together, and we rule this city. You truly are completely delusional, Chloe, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. You have absolutely nothing to offer me. You are an accessory to international money laundering, standing in the office of the woman you tried to destroy. I am not giving you 20% of my tower. I am not giving you a single dime. Take your stolen notebook and get out of my building. The rejection hit her like a physical blow. The arrogant posture instantly vanished, replaced by a dark, venomous rage. Her hands began to shake as she reached into her coat pocket. If she could not manipulate me into a partnership, she was going to revert to her favorite tactic: complete destruction. She pulled out her smartphone and held it up, pointing the camera directly at my face. The red recording light blinked aggressively. You think you hold all the cards, Simone? Chloe hissed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch as she circled my desk. But you just made a massive mistake. I am recording this right now, and I am going to send this video to every major news outlet in Atlanta. I did not flinch. I just watched her unravel. What exactly do you think you are filming, Chloe? I am filming my confession, Chloe sneered, moving the camera closer to my face. I am going to confess that you were the mastermind behind the entire money laundering operation. I am going to tell the world that you used Preston as a white corporate pawn to wash your illicit real estate funds. I am going to say that you forced me to forge that will to create a media distraction while you moved the money offshore. I am going to tell the FBI that this black notebook belongs to you and that you just threatened my life if I did not help you destroy the evidence. She was panting now, high on the adrenaline of her own fabricated blackmail scheme. She truly believed she had backed me into an inescapable corner. She was trying to weaponize the very crimes she committed, flipping the narrative to make me the criminal mastermind. You are going to sign over 20% of that tower right now, Simone, Chloe ordered, jabbing her finger at the desk. Or I hit send. I will drag you down to the federal penitentiary right alongside my husband. I will make sure the city seizes your precious skyscraper and bulldozes it to the ground. Sign the papers. You always were so focused on being the center of attention. Chloe, I said, my voice perfectly calm, echoing clearly in the quiet room. You love the camera. You love putting on a show, but you never quite learned how to read the room. Look up, I commanded. Chloe frowned, her eyes darting upward. Tucked discreetly into the corner of the ceiling molding was a sleek, high-definition security camera. A small green light blinked steadily, indicating it was actively transmitting. That is not just a standard security camera, Chloe, I explained, leaning forward, placing my elbows on the desk. That is a direct, secure live feed. When you barged past my security team screaming about holding the keys to Preston offshore accounts, my partner Jordan initiated an emergency broadcast protocol. You are not just recording a video on your phone right now, Chloe. I continued, my voice slicing through her rising panic like a surgical scalpel. For the last 10 minutes, you have been broadcasting live directly to the personal secure server of the Atlanta Chief of Police and the lead FBI agent assigned to the Sterling fraud case. They just watched you slam physical evidence of an international financial crime onto my desk. They just watched you admit to forging a legal document. And they just watched you commit felony extortion and blackmail by threatening to frame an innocent woman unless she signed over corporate assets. You did not just bring me Preston Ledger, Chloe, I said, picking up the black notebook and sliding it safely into my desk drawer. You just hand-delivered a fully documented video confession of your own complicity in his crimes. You just gave the federal government everything they need to indict you. The sound of distant sirens began to wail, echoing through the streets of downtown Atlanta, growing louder and closer with every passing second. Chloe spun around, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows as 3 black federal SUVs aggressively pulled up to the curb right outside my office building. "No," Chloe gasped, grabbing her hair in absolute terror. "No, Simone, please, you have to tell them I was joking. You have to tell them I was just upset about the foreclosure. Please, you are my sister." I stood up, buttoning my blazer, looking down at the woman who had spent 30 years trying to destroy my spirit. "I do not have a sister," I said coldly, as the heavy glass doors of my office swung open, revealing 4 armed federal agents holding shiny silver handcuffs. "I only have a business, and you are officially a bad investment." The heavy oak doors of the Fulton County Superior Court courtroom swung shut behind us, sealing the Walker family's civil ownership fight inside a room packed with reporters and federal observers. I sat at the plaintiff table, perfectly still, wearing a sharp ivory suit that stood against the somber colors across the aisle. Marcus Sr., Vivian, and Preston sat shoulder to shoulder behind their lead defense attorney. Chloe, released on bail after the previous night's extortion arrest, sat in the gallery, looking like a hollowed-out version of the golden child she once was. The question before the court was simple and enormous: who legally owned Walker Tower? The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. Preston was sweating profusely, his usual arrogant posture replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. He was clinging to this civil trial as his absolute last lifeline. If he could legally seize Walker Tower, using the forged will, he believed he could liquidate enough assets to flee the country before the federal indictments dropped. Their lead attorney, a man with a booming voice and a predatory reputation, stood before Judge Harrison. The judge had initially granted the emergency asset freeze as a favor to Preston, but today, the courtroom was packed with national media and federal observers. The corruption could no longer hide in the shadows. "Your Honor," the opposing attorney began, pacing confidently across the polished floor. "We are here to rectify a massive theft of generational wealth. My clients have presented the original handwritten will of the late Walker family patriarch. This document explicitly mandates that all commercial real estate ventures developed with family resources remain under the sole control of Marcus Walker Sr. We have submitted sworn affidavits from the family, stating that Simone Walker illegally diverted company funds and intellectual property to build Walker Tower. We ask the court to permanently transfer ownership of Onyx Holdings and all its assets to the rightful family trust managed by Preston Sterling." Judge Harrison peered over his glasses, looking directly at my legal team. "Does the plaintiff have a response to this newly discovered document?" I did not even look at my lawyer. I stood up myself, smoothing the front of my ivory jacket. "We do not just have a response, Your Honor," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clarity. "We have the exact digital blueprint of the fraud that is currently sitting on your desk. The defense claims this will is a decades-old historical document. We would like to call our first and only witness to the stand to clarify exactly when and where that piece of paper was created." The courtroom doors opened at the back of the room. The murmurs from the gallery instantly escalated into a shocked frenzy. Walking down the center aisle, flanked by 2 federal marshals, was Martin Davis, the former chief financial officer of Preston Sterling's venture capital firm. Martin had handled the shadow ledgers, offshore transfers, and dirty internal books Preston expected him to carry alone. What Preston did not know was that my lawyers had reached Martin before the hearing and connected him directly with federal prosecutors. After the government placed him under protection and offered a formal cooperation agreement in exchange for truthful testimony, Martin agreed to bring the original digital records into court. Martin took the stand, swearing the oath with a trembling but resolute voice. My lead attorney approached the podium holding a copy of the contested will. Mr. Davis, my attorney, started projecting his voice for the entire courtroom to hear. Can you please tell the court your previous occupation and your relationship to the defendant, Preston Sterling? Martin adjusted the microphone, his eyes darting briefly toward Preston before locking onto the judge. I was the chief financial officer for Sterling Venture Capital for the past 7 years, he answered clearly. I managed all internal accounts and private family trusts for Mr. Sterling. My attorney held up the yellowed piece of paper. The defense has submitted this document claiming it is a decades-old will belonging to the Walker family. Have you ever seen this document before? Yes, Martin answered, leaning forward into the microphone. I saw it exactly 4 days ago, because I was standing in Preston Sterling private office when he created it. Please explain to the court exactly how this historical document was created, my attorney pressed, pushing the advantage. Preston was desperate. Martin testified, his voice growing stronger. His fund had completely collapsed and he owed tens of millions of dollars to very dangerous international investors. He needed immediate liquid assets to flee the country. When he realized Simone Walker owned a $400 million skyscraper, he formulated a plan to seize it. He acquired an old signature from a charity auction receipt belonging to Marcus Walker's senior late father. He brought the signature to his office and hired a digital graphic designer to overlay the signature onto a fabricated legal text. Martin pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and held it up for the judge to see. I have the original raw digital files right here, Martin continued. I made a backup copy before leaving the firm. The files contain the exact digital metadata, the Photoshop layer history, and the timestamp, proving this will was manufactured on a computer registered to Preston Sterling exactly 4 days ago. Furthermore, I have the purchase receipt for the vintage parchment paper they used to print it. They bought it online from a specialty prop store in Los Angeles. Objection, the defense attorney shouted, jumping to his feet, his voice cracking with panic. This witness is a disgruntled former employee. This evidence is completely fabricated to discredit my clients. Judge Harrison ignored the lawyer completely. The judge was corrupt, but he was not suicidal. He knew that the federal marshals standing in the room meant the FBI was already involved. He was not going to risk his own career and freedom to protect a sinking ship. He turned his stern gaze directly onto Preston and then onto my father. Mr. Walker, the judge said, his tone dropping to a dangerous rumble. Did you knowingly present a forged document to this court under penalty of perjury to steal assets from your own daughter? This court has heard enough, Judge Harrison declared, slamming his heavy wooden gavel down with a resounding crack. The evidence of fraud and forgery is overwhelming and undeniable. The emergency injunction placed on Onyx Holdings and Simone Walker personal accounts is lifted immediately and retroactively. The civil racketeering lawsuit filed by the defense is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate transfer of all evidence presented today to the United States Attorney's Office for review of multiple felony perjury and forgery charges against Marcus Walker, Sr., Vivian Walker, and Preston Sterling. In the midst of the screaming and the crying, the venture capitalist quietly slipped away from the defense table. He kept his head down, using the chaotic crowd of reporters and furious spectators as a human shield. He was moving quickly and deliberately toward the heavy oak exit doors at the back of the courtroom. He knew the federal wire fraud indictments were coming next. He was making a desperate final run for his life. Preston burst through the heavy doors and sprinted down the marble hallway. He bypassed the elevators, taking the concrete stairwell down to the underground parking garage 2 steps at a time. His breath was ragged, his custom suit drenched in cold sweat. He burst through the fire doors into the dim fluorescent light of the parking level, his eyes frantically scanning the rows of cars for his luxury sedan. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his car keys, his hands shaking so violently he dropped them onto the concrete. He scrambled to his knees, snatching the keys from the dirty floor. He looked up, ready to sprint to his vehicle. Standing directly in front of his black sedan, completely blocking his path, were 6 federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets. They were not local police. They were the specialized white-collar crime division of the FBI, and they had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Preston Sterling, the lead agent, stated, his voice echoing sharply through the cavernous concrete garage. "You are under arrest for international money laundering conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and felony extortion." Preston dropped his keys. The arrogant, untouchable aristocrat fell to his knees in the middle of the dark parking garage, completely broken and entirely alone. As the heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists, sealing his destruction forever, I stepped out of the stairwell and watched from the shadows. The golden child husband, the architect of my family betrayal, was finally exactly where he belonged. 6 weeks after the county courthouse doors slammed shut on Preston Sterling, the Atlanta Skyline officially belonged to me. The grand opening of Walker Tower was not just a real estate milestone, it was the absolute coronation of my independence. The massive glass structure gleamed under the night sky, its base illuminated by sweeping spotlights that cut through the darkness. Inside the grand lobby, the city true power players were gathered. Mayors, governors, and international investors clinked crystal champagne flutes, eagerly waiting for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The air buzzed with the intoxicating energy of pure, unadulterated success. I had won. But a cornered rat is always the most dangerous, and my family had been backed into the tightest, darkest corner imaginable. While I was greeting billionaires in a custom emerald gown, my parents and my sister were rotting in a cheap short-term rental on the outskirts of the city. Preston was sitting in a federal holding cell, but Marcus Sr., Vivian, and Chloe had managed to avoid criminal indictments. They were bankrupt, publicly disgraced, and completely exiled from the black elite society they had once ruled, but they were still free. And freedom combined with absolute desperation is a highly combustible mixture. They had lost their mansion, their cars, and their pride. The only thing they had left was their burning, venomous hatred for the daughter who had exposed them. They could not accept that the poor sister had triumphed. If they could not have the empire, they were going to burn it to the ground. I knew they would not go quietly into the night, which is why my security protocol for the grand opening was tighter than a Federal Reserve Bank. But Marcus Sr. knew the logistics industry, and he knew how to exploit the invisible pathways of commercial buildings. My security team flagged their arrival exactly 14 minutes before the main event. The three of them had acquired forged press passes, slipping through the chaotic loading dock entrance alongside the catering crews and local news vans. They looked pathetic. Vivian, a woman who once refused to wear a dress twice, was hiding her face under a cheap baseball cap and oversized sunglasses. Chloe was trembling in a dark trench coat, her designer bags replaced by a heavy industrial canvas duffel. Marcus Sr. led the way, navigating the concrete service corridors of the sub-basement with the frantic, obsessive energy of a man who had completely lost his grip on reality. They were avoiding the glittering gala above, moving like parasites through the veins of my building, through the hidden security microphones embedded in the concrete walls. I listened to their hushed, frantic whispers. They were not just here to cause a scene. They had brought 3 gallons of a highly corrosive industrial chemical stolen from one of Marcus' liquidated logistics warehouses. Their plan was as deranged as it was devastating. They were going to pour the chemical directly into the central electrical grid cooling system. The corrosive liquid would melt the protective casing trigger, a massive chain reaction short-circuit, and plunge the entire 50-story skyscraper into absolute darkness right as I stepped up to the podium. The ensuing panic, the fire alarms, the emergency evacuations would create a catastrophic public relations nightmare. Investors would panic. City inspectors would swarm the building claiming it was unsafe. And in the midst of that chaos, my father planned to approach me with a simple, terrifying ultimatum. He would threaten to go to the press and claim the electrical failure was due to my cheap, rushed construction methods. He would promise to ruin the safety rating of Walker Tower permanently unless I signed over a massive, untraceable offshore settlement to fund their new lives. It was extortion built on the ashes of sabotage. "Hurry up, Dad," Chloe hissed, her voice echoing faintly through the concrete service tunnel. "If we do not trigger the blackout before she cuts the ribbon, we lose all our leverage. This building needs to go dark while the cameras are rolling." "Keep your voice down!" Marcus Sr. snapped back, the sound of heavy liquid sloshing inside the duffel bag. "I know exactly what I am doing. When the main server melts, the backup generators will fail too. She will be humiliated in front of the entire country. She will have no choice but to pay us to keep quiet about the structural flaws. We are taking back what is ours. Vivian chimed in, her tone dripping with toxic justification. It serves her right. She threw her own mother onto the street. She needs to learn that you cannot cross this family and get away with it. We built her. We can destroy her. I listened to their profound, unshakable delusion through my earpiece. They had learned absolutely nothing. Losing their wealth had not humbled them. It had only exposed the rotting hollow core of their morality. They were willing to risk the lives of hundreds of innocent people upstairs, willing to risk a massive electrical fire, all to punish me for surviving their abuse. They reached the deepest level of the sub-basement. The air down there was cool and humming with the immense power of the building's central nervous system. Marcus Sr. approached the heavy reinforced steel door of the main electrical room. He pulled a specialized electronic lockpick from his coat, a tool he had undoubtedly acquired through his shady logistics connections. He jammed the device into the digital keypad, the machine word processing the algorithms attempting to bypass the security encryption. Chloe bounced nervously on her heels, clutching the heavy canvas duffel bag containing the corrosive chemicals. Vivian stood, lookout, her eyes darting toward the empty corridor. The lockpick beeped a sharp, high-pitched tone, and the heavy magnetic seal of the steel door released with a loud click. "We are in," Marcus Sr. whispered, a twisted, victorious smile spreading across his aged face. "Give me the bag, Chloe. Let us turn the lights out on the poor sister." He grabbed the heavy handle of the steel door and yanked it open, stepping triumphantly into the dark electrical room. But the room was not dark. The moment the door swung wide, the motion sensors triggered a blinding array of high-intensity tactical floodlights, completely illuminating the massive concrete room. Marcus Sr. froze, his hand still gripping the door handle. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, dropping the canvas duffel bag onto the floor. Vivian stumbled backward, letting out a strangled cry of pure, unfiltered terror. I was not upstairs sipping champagne. I was not standing at the podium waiting for the cameras to flash. I was sitting in the exact center of the electrical room, perfectly positioned in a plush leather armchair I had brought down specifically for this occasion. My emerald silk gown pooled elegantly against the cold concrete floor. My legs were casually crossed, and a crystal glass of sparkling water rested in my hand. Flanking me on all four walls were high-definition, red blinking security cameras perfectly angled to capture every single inch of their faces, the lock-picking device, and the duffel bag of industrial chemicals. Standing directly behind my chair were four heavily armed members of my private security detail, their expressions completely unreadable. I took a slow, refreshing sip of my water, looking at the three frozen, terrified people standing in the doorway. "You always did have a terrible habit of underestimating my intelligence, Dad," I said, my voice echoing smoothly across the cavernous room. "Did you honestly think I would build a $400 million fortress and leave the back door unlocked for the very people who tried to destroy me?" I stood up slowly, brushing an invisible speck of dust from my emerald silk gown. The stark contrast between my immaculate appearance and their desperate grime painted the perfect picture of our new reality. "You spent my entire childhood telling me I lacked foresight, Dad. You said I was the impulsive one. Yet here you are standing in a high-voltage control room with a bag of stolen industrial acid, thinking you outsmarted a woman who owns the very concrete beneath your feet." Marcus Sr. stepped back, but there was nowhere to go. The heavy steel door was blocked by my security team. His eyes darted wildly around the room, taking in the blinking red lights of the security cameras. The logistics titan, the man who used to command boardrooms with a single glare, was now sweating through a cheap windbreaker. The smell of fear rolling off him was potent and undeniable. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, holding it up with a shaking hand. He then grabbed the heavy canvas duffel bag from Chloe, unzipping it violently, to reveal three large plastic jugs of corrosive chemicals. The pungent, toxic smell of industrial acid immediately began to leak into the enclosed space. "If I open these containers and dump that chemical into the electrical system," Marcus Sr. threatened, his voice rising into a frantic, hysterical pitch, The damage will trigger a catastrophic failure and a fire. We will all burn, Simone. I will destroy this room, and the opening above us, unless you sign this contract right now. I looked at the crumpled paper. And what exactly am I signing, Dad? An irrevocable trust agreement, he demanded, waving the paper aggressively. $10 million a year. A guaranteed lifetime allowance for me, your mother, and your sister. You sign this and we turn around and walk out the back door. You keep your shiny new skyscraper and your billionaire status, and we get the compensation we deserve for building the family name you are currently profiting from. If you refuse, I dump the acid. We go up in flames, and your legacy dies before it even begins. Chloe was trembling so hard her knees literally knocked together. Dad, stop, she whimpered, backing away from the bag of chemicals until her back hit the concrete wall. You said we were just going to cut the power and negotiate. You never said anything about a fire. I do not want to die in a basement. Vivian grabbed Marcus Sr. by the arm, her face pale with absolute terror. Marcus put the bag down. She has cameras everywhere. The FBI will see everything we are doing. We just wanted the money. We cannot do this. Shut up, Vivian, he roared, shoving her away so hard she stumbled. We have nothing left. We are living in a roach-infested motel. My country club revoked my membership. My friends will not even look at me on the street. I am not spending the rest of my life in poverty, while this ungrateful girl gets to be the queen of Atlanta. Sign the paper, Simone. I did not flinch. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, closing the distance until I was close enough to see the broken blood vessels in his eyes. You are not going to open that bag, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal, calm whisper. You are a coward. You have always been a coward. You let Preston steal your company because you were too afraid to look incompetent to a white man. You watched 3 grown thugs beat your daughter in a hotel lobby because you were too terrified to intervene and risk your social standing. You do not have the spine to light a match in this room. You just want the easiest way out. But there are no more exits. If you even attempt to unscrew the cap on those chemicals, my team will neutralize you before a single drop hits the floor, I stated cleanly. You are holding a bag of toxic evidence on federal camera while attempting to extort a chief executive officer. You did not bring a weapon, Dad. You brought your own signed confession. Vivian fell to her knees, weeping hysterically. Her cheap baseball cap fell off, revealing her unkempt hair. Simone, please, we are your family. Have mercy on us. We have lost everything. I am your mother. You cannot do this to me. You lost everything because you gambled your soul for a seat at a table that despised you, I replied, staring down at the woman who had abandoned me at every critical juncture of my life. You went on live television and diagnosed me with schizophrenia to steal my company. You wanted high society. You wanted the cameras and the flashing lights. You wanted everyone to admire the flawless elite Walker family. Well, Mother, today is your lucky day. I am going to give you exactly what you have always wanted. I turned to Malik. Secure the chemicals and gather the extortion document. Hand the evidence over to the federal agents waiting upstairs. Then escort our very special guest to the main lobby. Where are we going? Chloe panicked, grabbing my arm. Simone, please just let us leave through the loading dock. We will take the bus. We will never bother you again. I swear we will leave Atlanta tonight. Please do not do this. I yanked my arm out of her grasp, smoothing my silk sleeve. You are not leaving through the back door, Chloe, I said, turning on my heel and walking toward the heavy steel exit. Today is the grand opening of Walker Tower. The American media is waiting right outside these doors. Wall Street investors, political leaders, and every high society socialite who ever attended one of Mother Charity galas is currently drinking my champagne in the main hall. We are going to walk right out there and let them admire the true face of the Walker family. Malik and his men grabbed my father by the arms, hauling him forward. They pulled my weeping mother from the floor and forced Chloe to march in line. I led the procession out of the dark electrical room and into the brightly lit service corridor. We moved toward the main service elevator, the rhythmic clicking of my heels echoing off the walls like the ticking of a doomsday clock. I stepped out of the elevator, my security team pushing my trembling family right behind me. We walked down the plush carpeted hallway leading directly to the main stage. The event coordinator saw me approaching and frantically signaled the audio engineer. the jazz music faded out, instantly replaced by a dramatic, expectant drum roll that made the floor vibrate. Ladies and gentlemen, a booming voice echoed over the state-of-the-art sound system. Please direct your attention to the main stage and join me in welcoming the founder and chief executive officer of Onyx Holdings, the visionary behind Walker Tower, Ms. Simone Walker. The heavy velvet curtains parted. The blinding glare of hundreds of camera flashes illuminated the room like a lightning storm. I stepped out onto the polished marble stage, looking out over an ocean of reporters, politicians, and billionaires. They were all looking up at me, waiting for the triumphant speech of Atlanta's newest titan. And standing right behind me, exposed to the harsh, blinding light of the national media, were the broken, desperate traitors who had tried to bury me. I walked to the sleek acrylic podium standing center stage. The roar of the crowd washed over me, a tidal wave of applause and adoration from the most powerful figures in Atlanta. I rested my hands on the edges of the podium, looking out at the glittering sea of custom suits and designer gowns. Down in the front row, right at the edge of the stage, Malik and my security team had positioned my father, my mother, and my sister. To the untrained eye, they looked like VIP guests, granted the best view in the house, to support their triumphant blood relative. Marcus Sr. straightened his windbreaker, trying to mask the smell of chemical acid still clinging to his clothes. He puffed out his chest, looking around at the state senators and real estate tycoons. He genuinely believed he had won. He believed that the unwritten rules of Black high society would protect him. He thought that in a room full of cameras, I would be forced to play the role of the dutiful daughter. I thought I would prioritize the pristine image of the Walker family over my own justice. Vivian quickly composed her face, pasting on her signature country club smile, even though her eyes were darting nervously toward the exits. Chloe crossed her arms, attempting to look aloof and superior, completely oblivious to the fact that her entire existence was about to be publicly eradicated. They were relying on my silence to survive. They were banking on my desire for a flawless grand opening. Good evening, Atlanta. I began, my voice ringing with absolute authority over the state-of-the-art sound system. Thank you all for joining me to celebrate the inauguration of Walker Tower. Tonight is not just about concrete and glass. It is about legacy. For generations, the Walker family name has been associated with business success and community leadership. My parents, Marcus and Vivian Walker, are standing right here in the front row. The crowd applauded politely, turning their attention to my family. Marcus Sr. smiled, giving a modest nod to the mayor sitting a few feet away. I smiled right back at my father, a slow, sharp curve of my lips that made the color instantly drain from his face. But a legacy built on illusions is destined to shatter. I continued, my tone dropping into a deadly serious register. And true leadership requires absolute transparency. Tonight I want to show you exactly what it takes to build an empire and exactly who tries to tear it down. I stepped back from the podium and raised my hand, signaling the control booth. The massive 2-story high LED screens behind me went completely pitch black. The smooth jazz music playing in the background was abruptly cut off. A collective gasp echoed through the grand lobby as the screens suddenly flickered to life, displaying crystal-clear, high-definition security footage. The timestamp in the corner of the video showed it had been recorded less than 10 minutes ago. The entire ballroom watched in stunned silence as the massive screens displayed Marcus Sr. picking the lock to the central electrical grid of the very building we were standing in. They saw Chloe trembling in her trench coat, clutching a heavy industrial canvas duffel bag. They saw Vivian nervously keeping watch in the sub-basement corridor. The high-fidelity audio pumped through the premium ballroom speakers, broadcasting their voices to every single billionaire, politician, and media outlet in the room. If I open these containers and dump that chemical into the electrical system, my father's recorded voice boomed over the speakers. The damage will trigger a catastrophic failure and a fire. We will all burn, Simone. I will destroy this room and the opening above us unless you sign this contract right now. The video continued to play, showing Chloe whining about extortion and demanding a lifetime allowance. It showed Vivian dripping with toxic entitlement as she justified their criminal sabotage. It serves her right, Vivian's voice hissed over the speakers, filling the grand hall with her undeniable malice. She threw her own mother onto the street. She needs to learn that you cannot cross this family and get away with it. We built her. We can destroy her. I stepped back up to the microphone, cutting the video feed, but leaving the final frozen image of my father holding a bag of industrial acid projected across the entire wall. I did not hide this from you to cause a scandal, I announced, projecting my voice over the rising panic in the room. I showed you this because the era of protecting toxic abusers to maintain a fake high society image is officially over. At that exact moment, the heavy glass doors of the main lobby burst open. 24 heavily armed officers from the Atlanta Police Department, alongside federal agents, stormed into the Grand Hall. They bypassed the terrified billionaires and marched straight to the front row. Malik and my security team stepped aside, handing my family directly over to law enforcement. Marcus Walker Sr., you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, criminal sabotage, and felony extortion, the lead detective shouted, pulling my father's arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the silent, shocked crowd. Vivian let out a blood-curdling scream as two female officers grabbed her wrists, forcefully pinning her against the marble stage. "This is a mistake," Vivian shrieked, her fake country club persona completely disintegrating into hysterical tears. "I am Vivian Walker. You cannot do this to me. I know the governor." Chloe dropped to her knees on the polished marble floor, sobbing so violently she could barely breathe. She did not even fight the officers as they cuffed her. She just stared up at me, her eyes wide with the crushing realization that her life was entirely over. She had lost her rich white husband, her luxury penthouse, her social status, and now her freedom. She was going to federal prison, and she had absolutely nothing left to her name. The police dragged them through the center aisle of the grand lobby. The press corps went into an absolute feeding frenzy. Camera flashes strobed like a lightning storm, capturing every single humiliating second of the Walker family downfall. Microphones were shoved into their faces. Reporters shouted questions about their bankruptcy, their money laundering, and their attempted arson. My father kept his head down, broken and destroyed. My mother wept openly, her dignity shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Chloe simply looked like a ghost being led to the slaughter. The camera smoothly pulls back, gliding away from my face, tracking backward through the grand lobby. It drifts over the heads of the stunned billionaires, and the flashing cameras pulling further and further away. The shot floats backward, passing through the massive glass entrance doors, rising smoothly into the warm Atlanta night air. I watch my own figure grow smaller but undeniably powerful, standing center stage in a hall filled with brilliant golden light. They spent my entire life trying to convince me I was nothing. They called me the poor sister, the stain on the family legacy, the outcast who did not belong in their pristine, perfect world. They thought they could break me because they thought I was weak. But they forgot that pressure does not just break glass, it creates diamonds. The camera ascends higher, lifting into the dark sky, tilting upward to capture the towering, magnificent structure of Walker Tower. The black glass reflects the glowing lights of the sprawling city below, a monument to my survival and my absolute supremacy. Now I own the sky they can never reach.